Hey there guys, we're taking a look at Fallout New Vegas running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now, this time with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Last time we took a look at it, it was with 8 gigabytes of RAM and the game performed fine. But with 16 gigabytes of RAM, there are certain uplifts. But really, the game fundamentally does have performance issues just in its vanilla form. Specifically the 1% lows. You'll see that our averages are perfectly fine. The game does have a 60 FPS cap. It's really a limitation of just the engine in general. It really does not play well with you unlocking the frame rate. Weird things start to happen. So in general, I just don't recommend unlocking the frame rate in this game. But in general, you'll see that we're actually just running into a CPU limitation more than anything else. You'll see that the CPU is hardly being utilized. So it's only one core that's really being used. And we're maxed out in terms of clock speed there. And our GPU is not even being fully utilized here. Now we are at 1080p with the lowest in-game graphics setting. So we can turn things up to try to increase the load on the GPU there. And you'll see that once we turn up the settings all the way up to ultra, we're still running into a similar situation where the iGPU is just not being fully utilized. The CPU is the biggest limitation here, and our 1% lows are looking pretty much identical to where we were at before. And you'll see that even the power utilization kind of fluctuates all over the place, specifically because the GPU and CPU are so underutilized that we pretty much can just have boost clocks happening constantly. So even though the TDP is set to stock, you will see it go up to the mid-20s sometimes, even just because it can actually turbo, because as far as the system is concerned, it's hardly even really being utilized. And you'll see that our 1% lows are essentially within the same range as where we were at before. They're really identical. Things will start to drop down as soon as you just walk around and new things start to get loaded in. So that seems to be the biggest problem with this game, where the 1% lows will just tank as soon as you start to walk towards new areas that have to be loaded in the background. So it will drag down the experience somewhat, but it's still a really playable experience overall, and we are running at essentially the maximum graphics settings. So we can try to turn things up a bit more by actually modding the game. Now, I like to start off usually when modding Fallout with just stability mods, because the game already is very unstable. You can play it at stock perfectly fine a lot of the times, but you will still have crashing issues. You will have these, stutters. And I was hoping to alleviate the stutters more than anything else, but the crashing problems that this game has, especially as you get deeper into the game, will become far more noticeable. And already this is a very late game save. This is just me running around murdering the local wildlife, having an army of NPCs with me. So already it is a lot for the game to have to render, having essentially a group of like 10 NPCs with me at all times and whatever enemies we're fighting. And so having so many NPCs with me does end up leading to more crashing problems that a lot of times just need to be alleviated with some modding. So there are collections you can get on the Nexus mods website, and one of them is supposed to be essentially a bunch of stability mods for the game. So I went through the effort of going through the installation process. And as we all know, the true mark of a Fallout and Elder Scrolls fan is spending multiple hours a day modding the game only to make it so unplayable and broken that you can't continue to play it anymore. Luckily, this time around, we broke away from that bad habit and we pretty much just ended up doing some stability modding, at least for now. And of course, after getting all of these stability mods installed, I was at first happy to see the 1% low results were as good as they were, but we quickly ended up running into these same issues as always, which means that we ran into stuttering problems. And it all comes down to the same thing, where as soon as you're loading into a new area, things need to be loaded in, and that's what ends up causing 1% lows issues. A lot of the times though, while you're actually playing the game, things are a bit more stable, but overall the biggest benefit of all of this is just reducing any potential crashes that will end up happening. And trust me, when playing this game, those crashes will end up happening if you don't proactively go through the effort of modding in all of these stability fixes. Fallout New Vegas is one of my favorite games of all time, but I will not sit here and lie to you and say that it does not have major performance issues that are mostly caused by the fact that the development cycle of it is really a lot shorter than even some rushed out games that come out nowadays, where for pretty much the span of a year and a half, they had to make a whole new game off of what they had left over from Fallout 3. But seeing how the game is running now, and even with these stability patches, the fact that we're still having issues with the 1% lows, and overall we're we're still just very limited by the CPU here, and the GPU is not even being fully utilized. Well, that kind of just means we can start modding this and really not expect much of a hit in terms of performance, at least in theory. Anything that will start to stress out the CPU even more is going to cause even bigger issues because of the fact that the CPU is already the limiting factor here. So after going through the effort of downloading weapon texture mods in general for the terrain, and installing an ENB, we can see here that we are finally taking a pretty major hit in terms of our performance. But overall, our 1% lows are still definitely struggling and starting to get into unplayable ranges in general here. But it's not completely unplayable, and that was the most surprising thing to me, just because I remember when this game came out, I remember playing it, I remember my system struggling to play this at even these frame rates with ENBs installed. And here we are with the Rust ENB, which is like, I think the most popular one for Fallout New Vegas, and it looks good. You know, I mean, the game itself does look good. It is running at its maximum settings. It has, you know, ENBs, or it has the ENB installed. It has, you know, texture mods installed. So overall, this is a pretty good looking game now. It's just the level of performance that we're getting is very rough, and this is already with the maximum TDP. I decided to just max out the TDP for this because I didn't want to have to, like, you know, do testing with ENB on and then also with texture mods and all of that, and then swap around through all of the different TDPs to see if they would be playable. This is mostly just to see if we could mod the hell out of the game and have it at least somewhat function on the CPU, even if we like max out the amount of power being given to it. And as you can see, it is running and it is performing somewhat. I think if you're dedicated enough, you could play the whole game like this. I personally wouldn't do it. This is just way too low of an FPS for me to enjoy it. But then I started thinking, well, okay, we have it modded like this. What could we do to actually get it to perform well? And so I just dropped the resolution down to 900p. And I was honestly kind of surprised. Dropping down to 900p actually gave us an uplift in the 1% lows that realistically made this a actual somewhat playable experience. 1% lows in the 30s are going to be significantly better than 1% lows in the 20s. So this is actually kind of a pretty good experience, especially because our averages will sometimes go up into the 40s. So this is actually kind of playable. You could drop down to 720p and get a bigger uplift here, but 900p was also at a level where it was just like, okay, resolution wise, we're still good while also being able to utilize all of this heavy stuff, because dropping down to 720p just to have an ENB enabled is a little ridiculous, especially considering that we went through the effort of installing high quality textures only for them to just kind of be wasted by lowering the resolution. So overall, obviously, this isn't actually how I would realistically play the game. I don't think I would go with, like, you know, replacement textures or anything like that. But now I'm kind of convinced that an ENB is probably actually doable on here. Now keep in mind that this is the Rust ENB with its performance settings. So there are different, you know, presets that you can choose, but you will see that the ENB is running on a preset of it that is essentially targeted for more performance. I don't know what it looks like with the full stock version. It might look better than this. It probably looks better than this, but this is giving us some pretty decent performance considering we're on integrated graphics here. And yes, I get it, the game belongs in a museum, it's ancient at this point, but please name a better Fallout game. Just name a better Fallout game than Fallout New Vegas. And if you're gonna sit there and realistically say Fallout 3 or Fallout 4 to me, you're gonna have to write me like a 10-page essay down below on why you would have such a factually incorrect opinion. But really, overall, I gotta say, I'm actually really impressed with how this game is running on here with 16 gigabytes of RAM, especially because we have texture mods installed and all of that, and they're hardly even utilizing any more RAM. Now, if we were still on the 8 gigabyte version of this system, we'd be running into issues at this point, but we have more than enough RAM here. We're pretty golden. And keep in mind that the stability mod that I installed also has you go through the process of installing the 4 gigabyte patch to Fallout New Vegas, so the system is actually able to, or rather the game itself is actually able to utilize more memory. So yeah, this is definitely just one of those things where I was very curious to see how this would perform on here. I wasn't really thinking, oh, the game is going to be fully moddable on here, but if you go without ENBs, you can actually just mod the hell out of this thing, because really modding did nothing to the performance whatsoever. But anyways, I hope you found this video useful. If you did, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.